Darrell Cole was 38 years old, and until that Saturday night, he believed the hardest thing about his life was already behind him. He had built Cole Electrical Solutions from nothing. No inheritance, no shortcuts, just 14 years of early mornings and earned trust. His wife Brianna had just told him she was done, that he was a good man who would never be enough, that she'd spent 9 years waiting for him to become something. He gave her space. He processed. He was not the kind of man who chased, but driving home from a friend's house that night, he passed their favorite restaurant in East Point, and what he saw at that outdoor table turned every quiet grief he'd been carrying into something else entirely. His brother Darius and Brianna. The hand, the lean, the ease of two people who had stopped pretending. Darrell sat in that car for 4 minutes without moving, and in that stillness, something shifted in him that would never shift back. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Through the early morning haze, Darrell Cole moved with quiet authority across the construction site. The medical office building renovation was the biggest contract Cole Electrical Solutions had landed since opening their doors, a fact he acknowledged with focused determination rather than celebration. His boots crunched against scattered debris as he supervised his 4-man crew, each step measured and purposeful. "Marcus, hold up there," he called out, spotting something in the exposed ceiling that others might have missed. He moved closer, examining the conduit run with practiced eyes. "See this bend here? If we continue like this, we're going to hit that support beam in about 6 feet. Marcus, a younger electrician who'd been with the company for 2 years, stepped back and squinted. "Damn, you're right. Would have cost us 2 days to fix once we hit it." Darrell finished, already mapping out the solution in his head. "Let's redirect it now. Jimmy, grab that coupling from the truck. We'll need to adjust the angle here." This was how Darrell had built his reputation, seeing problems before they became disasters, solving them without drama or fanfare. He'd learned early that shouting didn't make the work go faster, and blame didn't fix mistakes. Instead, he led by example, demonstrating the same patience with his crew that he'd used to build everything else in his life. Later, driving his truck home through Atlanta's familiar streets, Darrell let his mind drift over the path that had brought him here. Southwest Atlanta had raised him tough but fair, a neighborhood where people looked out for each other because they had to. His father's departure when Darrell was 8 had left Gloria, his schoolteacher mother, to raise 2 boys on her own. She'd stretched every dollar and every lesson, teaching them that dignity wasn't in what you had, but in how you earned it. He'd gotten his electrician's license at 22, working under other contractors and learning not just the trade, but the business. Every job, every paycheck, every lesson absorbed and stored away. By 32, he and Andre, his friend from the neighborhood who'd brought military precision back from his Army service, had saved enough to launch Cole Electrical Solutions. Turning onto his street, Darrell noticed the house lights were on despite the early hour. As he pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The windows gleamed too brightly. Brianna had been cleaning. Not the regular maintenance she did weekly, but the deep, obsessive kind she only did when she was stressed or preparing for something difficult. Inside, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and fabric softener. Every surface sparkled. The throw pillows on the couch were perfectly arranged, magazines aligned on the coffee table. In 9 years of marriage, Darrell had learned to read these signs like weather patterns. He found Brianna at the kitchen table, still wearing her salon work clothes, but sitting unnaturally straight. She didn't look up immediately when he entered, her fingers tracing the edge of a water glass with mechanical precision. "Hey," he said softly, setting his keys down. "Everything okay?" When she finally raised her eyes, they were composed in a way that told him she'd rehearsed this moment. "We need to talk, Darrell." He sat down across from her, noting how she shifted slightly away. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out." "I'm not happy," she said, the words coming out with practiced steadiness. "I haven't been for a while now. I've been thinking about this, and I can't keep pretending." "Tell me what you need," Daryl said, leaning forward. "We could try counseling. Take some time away together?" "I don't think you can fix this, Daryl. That's kind of always been the problem." Her voice was cool, almost detached. "I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore. I wanted a life that looked like something. I spent 9 years believing you were going somewhere, and I'm tired of waiting." The words hit him like physical blows, but Daryl remained still, absorbing each one. "You're a good man," she continued, her tone softening with what might have been pity. "But good isn't enough anymore. I thought you were going to be something. I think I was wrong." She paused, then delivered the final blow. "I want a divorce." Daryl stood slowly, his chair scraping against the immaculate floor. "I need some air," he said quietly, turning toward the back door. Outside, he lowered himself onto the back steps, the concrete still warm from the day's heat. The yard stretched before him in the gathering dusk. The grass he'd cut 2 days ago, the flower beds he'd helped Brianna plant in the spring. He sat there, letting the weight of her words settle into his bones, unaware that this moment of devastation was only the beginning. 4 days after Brianna shattered his world, Daryl stood in their bedroom doorway, watching her pack. Her movements were efficient, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this too, maybe packed and unpacked in her mind 100 times before doing it for real. She folded her life into neat squares, tucking away 9 years of marriage into 3 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. "I'll be at Camille's," she said, not meeting his eyes. Indicator. "I'll come back for the rest later." Daryl nodded, his throat too tight for words. He didn't offer to help carry the boxes to her car. Some things a man couldn't do and still keep his dignity intact. The silence after she left was deafening. The house felt wrong, too big, too empty, filled with echoes of conversations that would never happen again. Daryl did what he'd always done when the world tilted sideways. He worked. He arrived at job sites before dawn, checking and rechecking electrical plans that didn't need reviewing. He stayed late, running extra inspections, filing paperwork that could have waited. His crew noticed but didn't comment. They'd worked with him long enough to know when to give him space. Andre watched this quiet implosion for 3 days before stepping in. "Coming over for dinner tonight," he said on Saturday morning, not making it a question. "Tanya's making that honey-glazed chicken you like." Daryl started to decline, but Andre cut him off. 6 o'clock. Don't make me come get you." That evening, sitting in Andre and Tanya's comfortable kitchen, Daryl felt something inside him ease slightly. They didn't press him to talk about Brianna. Instead, they watched the Falcons game, argued about bad calls, and let normal life wash over him like a balm. Driving home later, his mind felt clearer than it had in days. He was taking his usual route when he passed by Mary's Soul Food Kitchen in East Point, the place where he and Brianna used to share Sunday lunches, trading bites of fried catfish and collard greens across the table. His foot instinctively moved to the brake, but he shook his head. No point torturing himself with memories. Then he saw Darius. His older brother sat at one of the outdoor tables, commanding attention the way he always did. That big laugh of his carried across the parking lot. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, the pose he took when he was in full performance mode, telling one of his stories that always seemed to end with him looking good. Daryl's hands tightened on the steering wheel, about to press the gas and drive on. Then the woman across from Darius turned, raising her hand to get the waiter's attention. The world stopped turning. Brianna. Not Brianna looking uncomfortable or trapped in a chance encounter. Not Brianna having an awkward family conversation. This was Brianna relaxed, smiling, leaning into the space between them like it belonged to her. As Daryl watched, Darius reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture so casual it spoke of countless repetitions. Darryl pulled into the empty church parking lot across the street. He put the truck in park. Then he did something that would have surprised anyone who didn't truly know him. He sat perfectly still and watched, not with rage or immediate reaction, but with the same careful attention he gave to complex electrical systems that needed diagnosing. 4 minutes. He counted each one in his head. He watched how they moved together, the easy familiarity that couldn't have been born in just 4 days. He noted how Darius touched her shoulder when he laughed, how Brianna's fingers lingered on his wrist when she made a point. These weren't new habits. These were worn grooves. Without a word, without a move toward them, Darryl put his truck in drive and went home. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his living room, methodically rebuilding the past year in his mind. Every family dinner where Darius had sat next to Brianna, their conversation just a little too easy. Every time his brother had shown up unannounced at the house, always with some story about being in the neighborhood. The cookouts, where Brianna had started drifting toward Darius's circle of attention, laughing at his jokes, just a beat longer than necessary. The Charlotte business trip 8 months ago surfaced in his memory with painful clarity. 3 days away for a big commercial bid. Darius calling to check in. "Don't worry about Brianna, little brother. I'll make sure she's good while you're gone." Darryl had thanked him, grateful for family who looked out for each other. As the sun began to rise, painting his silent living room in shades of gray and gold, Darryl had made only one decision. He would not confront them. Not yet. Not until he knew everything. Every lie, every meeting, every betrayal they thought they'd hidden. The architect in him, the man who built things to last, understood that before you could tear something down, you had to know exactly how it was constructed. First, he would learn. Then, he would move. The morning sun had barely touched the Atlanta skyline when Darryl picked up his phone. He stared at it for a long moment before dialing Andre's number, knowing his friend would already be awake. Old Army habits died hard. "Need to see you," Darryl said when Andre answered. "Got something I need your help with?" 20 minutes later, they sat in Andre's kitchen, coffee untouched between them. Darryl laid out what he'd seen at Mary's Soul Food Kitchen with the same precise detail he used for electrical schematics. The timing, the body language, the casual intimacy that spoke of practice. Andre listened without interrupting, his face settling into the focused expression Darryl recognized from complicated contract negotiations. When Darryl finished, Andre didn't offer sympathy or outrage. Instead, he asked, "What do you need?" "Need to know how long," Darryl said. "Need to know everything they think they've hidden." Andre nodded slowly. "I might know someone. Guy named Ruiz. Used to work insurance fraud investigations before going private. He's good at finding what people don't want found, and he knows how to do it legal. You trust him?" "Wouldn't mention him if I didn't." 2 days later, Darryl sat in Andre's home office, holding a manila folder that felt too light to contain the weight of its contents. Ruiz had moved fast, using legal channels to obtain cell phone records that told a story in cold, clear numbers. 14 months of daily contact between Brianna and Darius. Multiple calls every day, sometimes lasting hours, text messages in the hundreds. The timeline stretched back well before Brianna had started pulling away, before the silences, before she'd started calling their life together small. "She wasn't unhappy first," Darryl said quietly, studying the dates. "She made herself unhappy to cover what she was already doing." Andre watched his friend absorb this, ready to step in if needed. But Darryl just nodded, folded the papers carefully, and went back to work. He didn't confront Brianna. He didn't call Darius. He simply carried the knowledge like a stone in his chest, waiting. 3 weeks passed. The house settled into a hollow routine. Then one Tuesday evening, Darryl's phone lit up with Brianna's name. "Can we meet?" she asked. her voice softer than he'd heard it in months. "At the house? There's something I need to tell you." She arrived 30 minutes later, wearing the cream sweater she saved for important occasions. Darryl noticed her hands first, usually steady, now twisting slightly in her lap as she sat at their kitchen table. "I've been diagnosed with ovarian cancer," she said, her voice cracking just enough. "Stage 2, doctor. Patricia Monroe at Grady Memorial is handling my treatment plan." Darryl kept his eyes on her hands as she spoke. He'd learned long ago that hands told truths faces tried to hide. "I have the paperwork," she continued, "but I left it at Camille's. I needed you to know. The insurance through the salon barely covers anything, and the treatment costs—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm not asking for anything. I just don't know what to do." Darryl watched her fingers brush imaginary lint from her sleeve, a tell she'd had since their first date, when she was nervous about the restaurant being too expensive. "How much?" he asked quietly. "The initial treatment plan is $22,000, she said, the number coming too quickly. "But please, don't feel—" "I'll write you a check," Darryl interrupted, already reaching for his checkbook. "We're still married. You're still on the joint account." He wrote carefully, each number precise. $22,000. Most of what remained in their shared account before the divorce would separate their finances permanently. He handed it to her without letting their fingers touch. "Get better," he said simply. She hugged him at the door, holding on a moment too long. Her perfume, the expensive one she'd started wearing last year, lingered after she left. Darryl watched her car disappear down the street. Then he pulled out his phone and called Andre. "Need you to listen carefully," he said. "I'm going to tell you exactly what she said about this diagnosis. Every word, every detail. And I need you to remember it all." Andre's fingers flew across his phone's screen the moment Darryl's call ended. "Ruiz, need everything you can find on a Dr. Patricia Monroe at Grady Memorial. Patient records for Brianna Cole. Timeline, immediate." Andre knew that look in Darryl's eyes when he'd recited Brianna's story, the same look he got on job sites when measurements didn't quite add up. Something was wrong, and Darryl had already sensed it. The next morning, Deirdre Okafor, Darryl's divorce attorney, filed a formal request for Brianna's medical records. Her language was precise. Given the substantial transfer of marital assets, $22,000, predicated on claimed medical expenses, full disclosure of related medical documentation is both relevant and necessary for accurate asset division. Darryl threw himself into work while they waited, running 3 job sites with the kind of focused intensity that made his crews whisper. He checked his phone only twice a day, always in his truck, always alone. 4 days later, Andre called. "My office," he said. "Now." Darryl found Andre and Ruiz waiting, a stack of papers on the desk between them. Ruiz, a compact man with careful eyes, nodded once and began laying out what they'd found. "Dr. Patricia Monroe exists," Ruiz said, sliding over a printed bio page. "Board-certified oncologist, excellent reputation, but she's never heard of Brianna Cole. Never treated her. Never even received a consultation request." He produced official documentation from Grady Memorial's records department. No patient file, no appointments, no billing records, nothing. Darryl's hands remained flat on his knees as he listened. The only movement was a slight tightening around his eyes. "The cancer story," Ruiz continued, "fabricated. But clever. She used a real doctor's name, probably found online. Used a major hospital people trust. Built just enough detail to sound credible without risking too many specifics that could be checked quickly. Andre took over, pulling out bank records. That's not all. The money moved fast. Within 48 hours of your check clearing, $18,000 transferred to a joint account." He paused. "An account Brianna opened with Darius 3 weeks before she ever came to you with this story." Darryl stared at the account details. The date stamps told their own story. This hadn't been impulse or desperation. This had been planned. His phone buzzed. Gloria's name lit up the screen. "Baby, you okay?" His mother's voice carried that schoolteacher concern that had gotten him through harder days than this. "Haven't heard from you since everything." "I'm managing, Mama. Just checking. You know how I worry." She paused. "Especially after what happened with the business troubles." Daryl's spine straightened. "What business troubles?" "The ones Darius told me about. 6 months ago? When he said you needed that $7,000 to cover some shortfall but were too proud to ask?" Gloria's voice shifted. "Daryl? You there?" "I never had any shortfall, Mama." The words came out careful, measured. "I never asked Darius to borrow money from you." The silence stretched between them. When Gloria spoke again, her voice had that steel edge Daryl remembered from childhood confrontations. "That money came from my retirement account. He said you needed it." "I'm so sorry, Mama. I didn't know." After the call ended, Daryl sat motionless in Andre's office. The evidence lay spread before him like a blueprint of betrayal. The fake cancer, the pre-planned joint account, the stolen retirement money, each piece fitting together with terrible precision. Andre watched his friend, ready for anger, for pain, for something to break loose. But Daryl's face settled into the same expression he wore when solving complex electrical problems. Quiet, focused, absolutely clear. "What do you want to do?" Andre asked finally. Daryl looked up, and his voice came out steady as a foundation wall. "I want them to think they won. For a little while longer." The morning sunlight cut sharp angles through the blinds in Deirdre Okafor's corner office as Daryl laid out the evidence piece by piece. Bank statements, medical record requests, Gloria's ledger. Each document another brick in a wall of deception. Deirdre, a former prosecutor turned family law specialist, studied each page with methodical attention. Her office, like her manner, projected precise competence. Degrees arranged with mathematical spacing. Desk clear, except for the growing stack of evidence. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said, setting down the last document. "Obtaining money through false pretenses, in this case, a fabricated medical emergency, constitutes civil fraud. The electronic transfer adds potential criminal exposure under wire fraud statutes." She leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "The premeditation here is significant. Opening a joint account weeks before approaching you suggests this wasn't desperation. It was strategy." "What's our next move?" Daryl asked. "We document everything. We file for full financial discovery through the divorce proceedings. Most importantly, we hold still." She pulled out a legal pad. "Let them operate normally while we build the case. People who think they've won get careless." Deirdre made notes as she spoke. "I'll contact the Fulton County DA's office today. Not to file charges, yet, but to establish groundwork. Having that criminal referral in our pocket gives us leverage when it's time to negotiate." She looked up from her notes. "You understand what we're building toward? This isn't just about division of assets anymore. This is about consequences." Daryl nodded. "I understand completely." Leaving Deirdre's office, Daryl sat in his truck and pulled out his phone. He stared at Darius's number for a long moment before dialing. His brother answered on the second ring. "Hey, little brother. Been a minute." Daryl kept his voice warm, measured. "Yeah, it has. Been going through something. Could use some family time, you know?" "Of course, man. You holding up okay with everything?" "Taking it day by day. Thought maybe we could grab dinner? Just us?" The relief in Darius's voice was audible. "Absolutely. Morton's? Tonight? Perfect. 7 work?" At the steakhouse, Darius was already seated when Daryl arrived. Same confident posture, same expensive watch, same practiced charm. He stood to hug his brother, clapping him on the back with calculated warmth. "You're looking good," Darius said, settling back into his chair. "All things considered." Daryl ordered a whiskey neat and watched his brother perform concern with theatrical precision. Darius shook his head sadly about the marriage, speculated about what might have gone wrong, never once mentioning Brianna's name. "Sometimes people just want different things," Darius offered, cutting into his ribeye. "Can't blame yourself, brother." Darryl noticed how Darius's hand tightened slightly on his knife with each lie. He stored every tell, every rehearsed phrase, every moment of false sympathy. The drive home felt longer than usual. Darryl was 3 blocks from his house when his phone buzzed with Ruiz's final report. He pulled into an empty church parking lot and began to read. The truth about Darius unfolded in clean, devastating paragraphs. His import consulting business, the source of his supposed success, hadn't handled a real client in 2 years. He was $86,000 in credit card debt. The BMW he drove was leased with falsified income documents. The watch he'd worn to dinner, a $3,800 Omega, had been purchased from a jewelry store in Buckhead 2 days after Brianna deposited Darryl's check. But it was the last section that made Darryl's hands go still on the steering wheel. For over a year, Darius had been feeding Brianna a steady stream of lies about Cole Electrical Solutions, invented project losses, manufactured client complaints, a completely fabricated story about the company losing its contractor's bond. He had systematically undermined Darryl's reputation with his own wife, convincing her that the business was failing, that Darryl was stagnating, that she was attached to a sinking ship. The dissatisfaction Brianna expressed that day in the kitchen hadn't just been natural. It had been cultivated, watered with lies, grown in the dark like something poisonous. Darryl sat in the dark parking lot, engine idling, letting the full weight of his brother's betrayal settle into his bones. The calculated nature of it all, the long game, the patient erosion of trust, the slow-motion demolition of everything Darryl had built, was almost admirable in its precision. The kitchen in Gloria Cole's southwest Atlanta home hadn't changed since Darryl was a boy. The same yellow curtains filtered the morning light. The same wooden table bore 30 years of family history in its surface, and his mother's hands still moved with the same precise grace as she set 2 mugs of coffee between them. "You've been carrying something," Gloria said, settling into her chair. Not a question. She'd been reading people's burdens for 40 years in classroom. Darryl wrapped his hands around the warm mug, looking at the table where he'd done his homework, eaten Sunday dinners, learned what family was supposed to mean. "I need to tell you some things, Mama. About Brianna. About Darius." Gloria's face remained still, but her fingers tightened slightly on her cup. "I've been watching," she said quietly. "More than you know." She began sharing her own quiet catalogue of observations. How Darius always seemed to need something when things were going well for Darryl. Small loans when Cole Electrical landed big contracts. Sudden crises when Darryl had good news to share. The way he'd position himself at family gatherings, always at the center, always performing. "And Brianna," Gloria continued, her voice taking on a teacher's precision, "started sitting closer to him at cookouts, started laughing harder at his jokes. I saw it, but I didn't want to speak on what I wasn't certain about. Maybe that was my mistake." Darryl shook his head. "You did exactly right, Mama. You let me see it for myself." Then, piece by piece, Darryl laid out the whole truth. The soul food restaurant where he'd seen them together. The 14 months of daily contact before Brianna ever mentioned divorce. The fabricated cancer diagnosis she'd used to extract $22,000. He told her about Darius's dormant business, the leased car, the borrowed confidence. Finally, he told her about the $7,000, the money Darius had taken from her using Darryl's name as leverage. Gloria sat perfectly still, her hands flat on the table, processing each revelation with the composure of a woman who had survived far worse than betrayal. When Darryl finished, the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "I want to tell you something," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of decades. I raised two boys in this house, taught them the same lessons, gave them the same love. She looked directly into Daryl's eyes. And one of them turned into a thief and a liar. And the other one I am proud of every single day. The words landed like stones in still water. Daryl felt their weight, their finality. "What do you need from me?" Gloria asked, and in her tone was the same strength that had carried them through every hard season. "I need to know everything, Mama. Every loan he asked for, every dollar he took, every story he told to get it. I need it all written down." Without another word, Gloria stood and walked to the back bedroom. Daryl heard drawers opening, closing. She returned with a small black ledger, the same one she'd used to track household expenses when money was tight, teaching him and Darius about budgeting at this very table. She set it in front of him. Inside, in her neat teacher's handwriting, was a detailed record of every transaction with Darius. Dates, amounts, promised repayment terms, the stories he'd told to justify each ask. "I kept track," she said simply. "Even when I wanted to believe him, something in me knew to write it down." Daryl reached across the table and covered his mother's hand with his own. Her skin felt paper-thin, but her grip was steel. They sat like that for a long moment, the morning light warming the kitchen around them, the ledger between them like a bridge between truth and consequence. The record was more detailed than Daryl had expected. Nearly $15,000 over 3 years, each entry accompanied by Darius's elaborate explanations, business opportunities that never materialized, emergency car repairs for vehicles he no longer owned, medical bills for ailments that vanished as soon as the checks cleared. What struck Daryl most wasn't the amount, it was the pattern. Each loan coincided with a success in Daryl's life, as if Darius couldn't bear to watch his younger brother rise without extracting something for himself. "I should have seen it sooner," Gloria said softly. "No, Mama. You did exactly what a mother should do. You hoped for the best in your son. He's the one who chose to be something else." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Deirdre Okafor's downtown Atlanta office, as Daryl, Andre, and the attorney reviewed documents spread across her mahogany conference table. Coffee cups sat untouched as they focused on finalizing every detail. "The divorce petition is ready," Deirdre said, tapping a thick folder. "I've included full asset disclosure requirements, with specific emphasis on the $22,000 transfer. The fraudulent medical claim is documented in detail." She pulled out another document. "I've also prepared the criminal referral for the DA's office, but we'll hold that unless needed. Sometimes the threat of consequences is more effective than the consequences themselves." Andre nodded, his military precision evident in how he'd organized their evidence into clear categories. Ruiz delivered the final bank records this morning. The paper trail between their joint account and the fraud is airtight. "Good," Daryl said quietly. "What's our timeline look like?" Deirdre checked her calendar. "I'll file the divorce petition this afternoon. The court will process it within 48 hours. That gives you the legal framework for whatever comes next." Daryl pulled out his phone and began composing a text message. "Then it's time to make the calls." He started with his aunt and uncle, his father's sister Marion, and her husband James, who had stepped in as male role models after his father left. The conversation was brief but warm. "I'm having some family over to Mama's on Sunday," he told them. "Need to address some things about the divorce. Keep everything in the light, so there's no room for rumors." His aunt's voice softened with concern. "Of course, baby. We'll be there." Next was Raymond Washington, who'd lived 3 doors down from Gloria for 30 years and watched both Cole boys grow up. "Mr. Washington," Daryl said, "I'd appreciate your presence on Sunday. You've known this family too long not to be there." "Wouldn't be anywhere else, son," Raymond replied. Gloria had already agreed to host, understanding exactly what role her home would play and what was coming. The kitchen table where she'd taught her boys right from wrong would now serve as the place where those lessons faced their final test. Daryl saved the most important call for last. He dialed Darius's number, keeping his voice carefully casual, when his brother answered. "Hey," Daryl said. "I'm putting together a small family gathering at Mama's on Sunday afternoon. About the divorce. I think it's better if we address everything openly, you know? No rumors, no sides, just truth between family." A pause on the line. "Is that really necessary?" "I think it's the only decent thing to do," Daryl replied, his tone warm and reasonable. "We're family." Another pause. "Who all's coming?" "Just close family. Aunt Marion and Uncle James. Mr. Washington. Mama, of course." Daryl kept his voice light. "And you should bring Brianna. I already know, and I'd rather we all behave like adults about it." The casualness of this last statement landed like a stone in water. Darius's breathing changed slightly. "You know?" "Of course I know," Daryl said simply. "And it's okay. Things happen. But we should handle it right, don't you think? As a family?" Darius struggled to find his footing in this unexpected territory. He'd prepared for rage, for confrontation, for denial, but not for this measured acceptance. "I'll need to check with Brianna," he managed. "Sure. Let me know by tonight." Daryl's voice remained perfectly pleasant. "Mama's planning to make her sweet potato pie." After hanging up, Daryl received a text from Darius 30 minutes later. "We'll be there." Andre, who'd been quietly observing, raised an eyebrow. They actually agreed. "People who think they've won let their guard down," Daryl replied. "They believe they're walking into an uncomfortable conversation with a man who's already accepted defeat. They have no idea they're walking into evidence." Deirdre gathered her files. "I'll head to the courthouse now. By Sunday, everything will be officially in motion." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the conference room table where the trap had been so carefully constructed. Sunday afternoon at Gloria's house was set. The table would be laid with more than just sweet potato pie. Gloria's house filled slowly that Sunday afternoon, each arrival shifting the energy in her modest living room. Aunt Marion and Uncle James came first, dressed in their after-church clothes, settling onto the familiar beige couch where countless family discussions had unfolded. Raymond Washington arrived next, his weathered face carrying the gravity of 3 decades, watching this family's story unfold. Gloria moved quietly through her own space, offering water and coffee, her yellow dress a deliberate choice that spoke of dignity rather than mourning. The room held its breath waiting for the last arrivals. When Darius and Brianna entered together, the shift was palpable. This was their first appearance as a unit in a family space, and the wrongness of it hung in the air like smoke. Darius, performing confidence he didn't feel, guided Brianna to seats near the window. He chose Daryl's usual chair, the one he'd sat in at every family gathering for years, either oblivious to the significance or, more likely, claiming it as deliberate territory. Brianna wore expensive perfume and a carefully constructed expression of composure. Her hands, usually so controlled, twisted slightly in her lap. Daryl entered last from the kitchen, carrying a folder. He remained standing, his presence filling the room without dramatics. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I asked you here because I was raised in this family to believe that truth is what holds us together, even when that truth is painful." He opened the folder and removed the first document. 3 weeks ago, I saw my wife and my brother having dinner at Mason's Soul Food in East Point. He stated it as simple fact. No anger coloring the words. They weren't hiding any. They didn't need to. Darius shifted in Daryl's chair. Aunt Marion's hand found Uncle James's knee. "What I'm about to share isn't about embarrassing anyone," Daryl continued, looking directly at his aunt and uncle. "But I will not allow a lie to live in this family unchallenged." He placed phone records on the coffee table. "These show 14 months of daily contact between my wife and my brother. The affair began long before Brianna ever expressed unhappiness in our marriage. The unhappiness was manufactured after the fact. Darius leaned forward. "Now, hold on. I'm not finished," Darrell said quietly, and the authority in his voice made his brother sink back into the stolen chair. Next came the company financials, tax returns, contracts, revenue statements. For over a year, my brother told my wife that Cole Electrical Solutions was failing. He invented losses. He manufactured failure. Darrell's eyes found Darius. He convinced her I was going nowhere while he was taking her somewhere better. The room absorbed this. Raymond Washington shook his head slowly, the weight of watching these boys grow up evident in his expression. Then Darrell removed the medical report. The air changed as he held it. 3 weeks after leaving, Brianna came to me with news of stage 2 ovarian cancer. His voice remained measured, each word precise. She named Dr. Patrice Monroe as her oncologist. She referenced Atlanta Memorial Hospital. She described treatment costs. He placed the report on the table. There was no cancer. No Dr. Monroe ever treated her. Atlanta Memorial has no record of her as a patient. Gloria's silence filled the corner where she sat, a schoolteacher's fury held in perfect stillness. The $22,000 I gave her for cancer treatment was transferred within weeks to a joint account she had already opened with my brother. Darrell let that land. They planned this. They executed it together. Brianna's composure cracked. "Darrell, please. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle everything. Things with us were so complicated." "Complicated is a choice we make," Darrell cut in. "Fraud is a crime we commit." "You don't understand," she tried again, her voice shifting to the vulnerable tone that had once moved him. "I never meant—" "Brianna," Darrell interrupted, his voice holding something final. "I've already spoken to my attorney and the DA's office. What I'm offering you right now, in this room, is the only mercy you're going to get from me. How this ends depends on what you choose in the next few minutes." The air grew thicker as Deirdre Okafor, her presence, until now a quiet reminder of legal consequence, rose from her seat near the window. She moved with practiced efficiency, placing a leather portfolio on the coffee table and extracting a document that seemed to carry physical weight beyond its pages. "This is a formal settlement agreement," she explained, her professional tone cutting through the tension. She placed it directly in front of Brianna, who stared at the papers as if they might burn her fingers. "You'll want to review it carefully." Brianna's hands shook slightly as she lifted the document. The room watched her eyes move across each page, her carefully applied makeup doing nothing to hide the color draining from her face. The terms were laid out in unforgiving clarity. Complete relinquishment of all claims to marital assets, a structured repayment plan for the fraudulently obtained $22,000 that would stretch across years, and most damning, a written acknowledgement of her false medical representations. Aunt Marion shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Uncle James kept his eyes fixed on a point on the wall. Raymond Washington sat perfectly still, bearing witness. "The repayment schedule is detailed on page 4, Deirdre continued, her voice maintaining its professional distance. "The monthly amounts are non-negotiable. This agreement will follow you until the full amount is restored." Brianna looked up at Darrell, searching for any trace of the man who had once loved her enough to believe her lies. She found instead someone new, someone forged in the fire of her betrayal, hardened by precision rather than rage. "And if I don't sign?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "Then the DA's office receives everything tomorrow morning," Deirdre replied simply. "The choice is yours, but it's the only choice you have left." Brianna turned to Darius, seeking support or strategy, or simply confirmation that she wasn't alone in this moment. But Darius, master of performance when the audience was willing, had nothing left to offer. He sat in Darrell's stolen chair, diminished by truth, watching his careful constructions collapse. The scratch of the pen against paper seemed unnaturally loud as Brianna signed each required line. Deirdre collected the document with quiet efficiency, tucking it into her portfolio like the evidence of ruin it was. Then Darrell turned to his brother. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the precise clarity of a man reading numbers from a ledger, which, in fact, he was about to do. Gloria's small black book appeared in his hands. June 12th, 2 years ago, he began. $20,500 borrowed for what you called business expansion. Never repaid. He turned a page. September 3rd, $1,800 for what you said was an investment opportunity. Never repaid. Another page. December 18th, $3,000 for what you claimed was a temporary cash flow issue. Never repaid. Each entry landed like a stone in still water. Darius seemed to shrink with each one. And then, Darrell continued, his voice carrying the weight of something far heavier than money. 6 months ago, you told our mother I needed $7,000 to cover a business shortfall. He closed the ledger. You lied to her face and took money she'd saved for her retirement. Money she earned teaching other people's children while raising us alone. Gloria's silence from her corner had become something physical, filling the room with unspoken judgment. You have 30 days to repay, Mama, Darrell said, each word measured and final. Every dollar. After that, I have nothing to say to you, and I will not be in the same room with you again. For the first time that afternoon, Gloria spoke. She looked directly at her eldest son and said simply, I want my money back, Darius. The performance artist had no stage left to command. The charming brother had no charm left to deploy. Darius Cole, stripped of his borrowed confidence, his manufactured success, his carefully constructed image, said only, I'll figure it out. The words sounded as hollow as the man who spoke them. The gathering dissolved without crescendo. No dramatic confrontations, no tearful exits. Just the quiet sound of Gloria gathering empty water glasses, Darrell rising to help her clear the table, and the soft click of the front door as Darius and Brianna left together. Though the space between them as they walked to the car suggested they were already moving in different directions. The truth about consequences is that they arrive not in thunderclaps, but in steady waves, washing away pretense layer by layer, until only reality remains. For Brianna, this erosion began with the first payment notification, $611 due monthly, stretching across years, each sum a reminder of a lie she could never untell. The fraud acknowledgement she signed that Sunday afternoon became a shadow on her credit report, following her like a persistent ghost. When she applied for a car loan 3 months later, the dealership's finance manager studied his screen too long before declining. When she tried to lease a new apartment, the property manager's expression shifted subtly while reviewing her application. The document hadn't just captured her signature, it had captured her character, visible now to anyone who looked closely enough. She and Darius tried to build something from the wreckage. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Stockbridge, far enough from familiar faces to start fresh. But fresh starts require clean breaks, and they carried too much debris between them. Every bounced rent check, every declined credit card, every financial strain became a reminder of what they'd sacrificed for this smaller life. Their arguments started small, about bills, about careers, about whose turn it was to face another humiliation at the grocery store when their card wouldn't clear. But they grew into something deeper, fed by the quiet knowledge that they had each proven themselves capable of profound betrayal. How do you trust someone you watched lie so efficiently? How do you build a future with someone who helped you destroy your past? 11 months after the family gathering, Brianna stood in their bedroom, packing a bag while Darius watched from the doorway. You said you could take care of us, she said, not looking at him. You said you had plans. I did have plans, he replied. but even he didn't seem to believe it anymore. She moved into her sister Camille's guest room the next day. The space was small, the twin bed a far cry from the life she'd imagined when she'd first looked at Darius across that restaurant table in East Point. She took extra shifts at the salon, working Sundays, building something true for the first time in years. Even if that something was just a repayment plan, she couldn't escape. Darius faced his own diminishment in measured installments. Every month, he handed Gloria an envelope containing what he could scrape together. Sometimes the full amount she demanded, sometimes less. She accepted each payment without comment, noting it in the same black ledger that had exposed him. The extended family didn't cut him off dramatically. They simply stopped including him naturally. No more automatic invitations to Sunday dinners. No more calls about family news. No more assumption of welcome. Trust, once broken, doesn't leave with a bang. It seeps away slowly until the absence feels permanent. Meanwhile, Cole Electrical Solutions continued its steady expansion. The medical office building contract, the one Daryl had been overseeing the morning Brianna ended their marriage, was completed ahead of schedule. 2 more commercial clients signed within months, attracted by the company's growing reputation for precision and reliability. Daryl brought on a junior partner, a sharp young electrician named Marcus, who reminded him of himself at 25. In late autumn, Daryl did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He took a week off. He drove his truck up to the North Georgia mountains alone, rented a cabin overlooking the Chattahoochee National Forest, and spent 7 days hiking trails and reading books he'd been meaning to get to. He thought about trust, about family, about what it means to build something that lasts. When he returned to Atlanta, he did something else unexpected. He found a therapist. Not because he was broken, but because he understood that the next chapter of his life deserved a solid foundation. He wanted to examine the architecture of his trust, to understand why he'd given it so freely, and how to balance openness with wisdom moving forward. On a bright Thursday morning in early spring, Daryl stood outside the West Side Community Center. A project Cole Electrical Solutions had agreed to wire pro bono months before Brianna ever sat at that kitchen table, and said she was leaving. Andre stood beside him, precise as always in his pressed shirt and polished shoes. Gloria sat in the front row of folding chairs, radiant in a yellow dress that seemed to catch all the morning light. A photographer from the Atlanta Business Chronicle adjusted his lens, preparing to capture the moment for a feature on black-owned contractors transforming the city's infrastructure. "Right there is perfect," he said, positioning Daryl next to the ribbon. "Now just look natural." Daryl didn't have to try. He stood exactly as he was, shoulders straight, eyes clear, hands that had built everything he owned resting easily at his sides. The camera captured him in that moment of quiet triumph, looking exactly like what he had always been, a man who builds things to last. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.